What would you do if dying wasn't the end, but something that kept happening to you over and over again? And worse, what if every time you came back, it wasn't a second chance, it was just another system trying to use you? That's the core idea behind the Dead Mage Doesn't Want a Fourth Time, the Japanese web novel slash light novel slash manga series that I have been following for several years. Before I get into it though, I want to say thank you for nearly reaching 1000 subscribers. I honestly didn't expect the channel to grow this quickly. I don't even know if this is considered fast in YouTube terms, but it definitely felt fast to me. Up until now, most of my videos have been about gacha games and storytelling in games, and that's still gonna be a big part of this channel. But if you read the channel description, this was never meant to be only about gacha. I've always been interested in stories, manga, novels, webtoons, games, and how different systems shape the people trapped inside them. And this story, more than most, really stuck with me. So instead of cramming it into a list of recommendations, I want to give it its own video and really talk about why this world, these characters, and these ideas make a really fun story. So let's start at the beginning. At its core, the Dead Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time is about a boy who has been unlucky for as long as he can remember. And I don't mean things didn't go his way sometimes, I mean constantly, fundamentally unlucky. He loses his parents at a very young age. He's taken in by his uncle's family, who don't treat him like family at all. He's abused, neglected, and constantly reminded that he's unwanted. He doesn't have friends, he doesn't have anything he feels attached to. There's nothing in his life that makes him think things will ever get better. And then one day, while on a school trip with his high school class, an accident happens, and everybody dies. That's where the reincarnation comes in. A god of reincarnation shows up, a god who oversees multiple worlds, and he decides to take these dead students and reincarnate them into one of his own worlds. A world that's roughly as advanced as ours, just with magic layered on top. This god gives everyone a special ability meant to help them survive and grow stronger in this new world. Everyone except the protagonist. Not because of some grand plan, not because of destiny. He just forgets. And instead of fixing that mistake, the god shrugs, decides it's good enough and sends him on his way anyway. Which, considering how unlucky this kid already is, goes about as well as you'd expect. Without any special abilities to protect him, he ends up captured and used as a test subject. He's experimented on, tortured, pushed past his breaking point, until eventually he snaps. He kills the people experimenting on him, and not long after that, he's killed by the other reincarnated students, the same people who were supposed to be his peers. And that's when the story reveals something important. This world, it was never meant to be permanent. It was a trial run. The god reincarnated them here just to let them gain experience, knowledge and power before reincarnating them again into a third world, a less developed world that he wants them to help build and shape. So when the protagonist dies in the second world, he realizes two things at the same time. First, reincarnation isn't a blessing, it's just another system that failed him. And second, the people who abandoned him, who benefited from the system while he suffered, are going to be reincarnated into the next world after him. And that's when he makes his decision. He vows to kill them, every last one of them. Naturally, the god of reincarnation doesn't want that to happen. So before sending him into his third life, the god places 3 curses on him, all designed to make sure he dies as quickly as possible, long before the others arrive. And that's where the story actually begins. Not with hope, not with a second chance, but with a boy who's already lived and died enough times to know that whatever comes next is going to try to crush him again. After everything that happens in the premise, you'd expect this story to turn into a very standard revenge narrative, and at first it looks like that's exactly where it's going. The protagonist is reincarnated into his third life carrying all that resentment towards the god who ruined him, towards the people who abandoned him, towards the system that keeps using him and throwing him away. But that's not what defines him, because for the first time in his life, he's loved. He's reborn as the child of a dark elf mother, and for the first few months of his life, he experiences something he never had before: care, protection, someone who genuinely loves him just for existing. It's small, it's quiet, but compared to everything that came before, it matters more than anything else, and then the world takes it away. In this fantasy world, there are many different species, but humans are the original race, and they see themselves as superior. Depending on where you are, non-human races are enslaved or simply killed. Dark elves fall into that category. The protagonist and his mother are hiding in a country where dark elves are actively persecuted, and eventually they're found. His mother is captured and she's burned alive, while the protagonist witnesses all of it. And this is where people usually expect the story to fully collapse into pure revenge, because even though he's still incredibly young, the protagonist already has power. Despite the god not giving him any blessings, he's developed death magic, something absurdly strong, with possibilities I'm not even going to fully get into here because it gets really wild. And in his grief and rage he uses it. He destroys an entire city. That's the moment where you think, okay, this is it. This is the point of no return. But here's the twist. Even in that moment, even after losing the person who mattered most to him, he doesn't let go completely. Using his death magic, he preserves his mother's soul. She's gone, but not erased. And from that point on, one of his core motivations becomes finding a way to give her a body again, not out of obsession, not out of denial, but because for him, connections matter more than vengeance. And as the story goes on, this pattern repeats. He meets more people, he builds a family, he finds friends, many of them from races the world treats as disposable, and slowly something shifts. He doesn't stop fighting, he doesn't stop clashing with the world or with the gods who look down on him and the people he cares about. But revenge stops being the point, protection becomes the point. Protecting the people who accepted him, protecting the fragile life he managed to build in a world that keeps trying to crush it. That's why I don't see this as a revenge story. It starts with hatred, but it doesn't end there. It's about someone who had every reason to become a monster, and instead chooses to become a shield. On the surface, the world of this story looks like a pretty standard isekai setting. Long ago, it was invaded by a demon god, a being so powerful that the gods of this world couldn't defeat it on their own. So they did what gods in these stories always end up doing. They summoned champions from another world. Those champions fought alongside the gods and eventually they won. But it wasn't a clean victory. They couldn't truly destroy the demon god, so instead they tore it apart. Literally, they shattered him into countless pieces and scattered them across the world. And the cost of that war was enormous. Many gods were sealed or forced into long slumber. Entire regions were wiped out. The world population was decimated. When the war finally ended, the gods were left with a broken world. And that's where the real conflict began, because the gods couldn't agree on what to do next. They split into two major factions. One side believed that nothing should change. The humans, the original race of the world, were supreme and that restoring humanity alone was the correct path forward. The other side looked at how close the world had come to extinction and reached a very different conclusion. They believed the world needed to be rebuilt, not preserved. One of the pillar gods, Vida, took that belief to its extreme. She decided to create new races to help the world survive and repopulate. And the way she did was unconventional. She gave birth to them, some with other gods, some with the summoned champions, some even with the former enemy gods who had defected after the war. And from that came vampires, dark elves, beastkin, and many other races that didn't exist before. To Vida, these races weren't mistakes, they were answers. But to the opposing factions of God, they were abominations, monsters, proof that the world was being corrupted instead of restored. Those gods tried to stop Vida, they tried to reason with her. When that failed, they turned against her, and even though the demon god had already been defeated, the world slid straight into another war, this time between the gods themselves. The result was the world split in two. On one side, humanity, backed by gods who believed only humans deserved to exist. On the other, Vida's races, protected by the gods who believed survival mattered more than purity. And this division never healed. It shaped the laws, the countries, the cultures. It's why non-human races are enslaved or hunted in many regions. It's why simply existing as something other than human can be a death sentence. And this is why the protagonist, a Damphir born from one of the Vida's races, is never allowed to live quietly, no matter how much he wants to. Because in this world, conflict isn't just personal, it's structural. The gods are still fighting, even if the battlefield has shifted to mortals. And that's what makes everything the protagonist builds so fragile, not because he's weak, but because the world itself was never designed to accept someone like him. On paper, this story is absolutely a dark fantasy. There are a lot of things that happen here that I can't really get into detail, partially because of spoilers, and partially because YouTube probably wouldn't be too happy with me going into all of that. It's a cruel world. People suffer. Systems chew people and don't care. You've probably already picked up on that from everything I've talked about so far. But what's interesting is that despite all that, the story never really feels hopeless. And that's important. Because this isn't one of these stories where the darkness exists just to grind the protagonist down over and over again. It never feels like the story is just spinning its wheels. The protagonist is strong, not invincible, especially early on, but strong enough that the world doesn't completely break him. He survives, he adapts, he gets stronger. And more importantly, he doesn't do it alone. As the story goes on, he gathers allies. He finds people who accept him. He builds something resembling a community, and eventually something much bigger than that, to the point where he actually creates his own country, made up largely of Veda's races, people who were never meant to have a place in the world as it existed before. So even though the setting is dark, the trajectory isn't downward. It's about carving out space, about taking something hostile and making it livable. That hope, the idea that things can still be built even after everything that went wrong, is what keeps the story from feeling suffocating. Now, keep in mind, this is still a Japanese isekai, so yeah, you're going to get the usual elements. There's fan service, there's harem, that's just part of the genre. But context matters here. The pacing of the story is very slow, and I mean that literally. The protagonist is reincarnated as a baby, and the early volumes cover him from infancy to early childhood. Even deep into the story, he's still only around 12 or 14 years old. So while the harem elements exist, it's not really played for anything explicit. It's more about relationships forming over time, bonds, loyalty, trust, rather than romance in the traditional sense. Personally, I like the slow pacing. It gives the story room to breathe. It lets moments sit instead of rushing from one plot point to the next. And that pacing reinforces one of the core themes of this story. This isn't about instant gratification or power spikes. It's about endurance, about surviving long enough to build something that lasts. So even though the world is cruel, even though the gods are petty, even though the system itself is hostile, the story never forgets to leave room for hope. And that's what makes the darkness feel meaningful, instead of overwhelming. Now there's one more reason why this story really stuck with me, and it's also one of the hardest things to talk about without spoiling the fun. The protagonist's death magic. This isn't just dark magic in the edgy sense. It's not about throwing skull-shaped fireballs or draining life points. It's closer to rewriting the rules of life and death in ways that feels deeply unsettling and strangely creative at the same time. And the story is very aware of how far that can go. Without getting into too much detail, there are moments where the protagonist uses his magic not to destroy, but to preserve identity in situations where life has already gone horribly wrong. There's a case where someone who's been completely broken by what happened to them doesn't want to continue living, and instead of forcing them to endure, the protagonist finds a way to let them continue existing in a different form, without erasing who they are. There are later developments where beings that shouldn't be able to reproduce are given that ability. Races that were slowly dying out are stabilized. People who are restored physically by revitalizing their bodies from the inside. And at some point, without even realizing, the protagonist starts creating something that resembles his own reincarnation system. Not because he wants to play God, but because death to him has never been something clean or final. What makes this especially interesting is that the story never treats this magic as normal. It's powerful, it's effective, but it's also deeply unnatural. Which brings me to the second part of this section, the aesthetics. The story leans hard into the grotesque imagery, and I mean that in the best possible way. Vida races aren't just humans with different ears. Some of them are visibly monstrous. Others are strange in ways that don't immediately register as threatening, but still feel wrong if you look too closely. The protagonist himself changes over time, his body, his abilities, even his soul. At one point, the way his soul develops becomes so alien that ordinary mortals can't even perceive it properly. Looking at it directly would drive them insane. Even some gods refuse to look at it, not out of hatred, but out of genuine discomfort. And the gods themselves, they're not all glowing humanoid figures either. Some are closer to living concepts than people. Things like flesh-like trees with eye-shaped fruits, or massive shifting forms that don't resemble anything human at all. What I love about this is that the story doesn't sanitize its divinity. Power isn't beautiful by default, creation isn't clean, and survival, especially in a broken world, often looks ugly. The dead magic and the grotesque visual work together to reinforce the same idea. This world wasn't built to be comfortable, and neither was the protagonist. So yeah, overall I genuinely love this story. And I don't say that lightly. Despite being an isekai, the dead mage who doesn't want a fourth time never really feels like the usual isekai slop you see everywhere. It's familiar on the surface, sure, but once you spend time with it, it keeps going in directions that most stories in the genre just don't bother with. The characters are fun, they're distinct, and more importantly, they actually feel shaped by the world they live in. The themes, the way different races interact, the way relationships form over time, all of that is handled with a lot more care than I expected going in. And even though I didn't go into too much detail here, the variety of races in this world goes way beyond the usual fantasy checklist. It's not just vampires, elves, dark elves, and done. It keeps expanding, and the way these groups interact socially, culturally, and politically ends up being one of the most interesting parts of the story. It's one of these series where the longer you sit with it, the more you realize how much thought went into building the world and the people inside it. So yeah, if any part of what I talked about here sounded interesting to you, I'd absolutely recommend giving it a try. If you read it, I'd actually love to hear what stuck with you. And if this video worked for you, focusing on one story at a time, taking it slow, really digging into why something stuck with me, I'll probably do more of this going forward. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.